Ben had always wanted a place far away from the city. He wanted a small home where he could feel calm and peaceful. After years of saving money and looking for the right spot, he finally found a little cabin in the woods. It was old and made of wood, but it was just what he needed. The cabin was not big or fancy, but to Ben, it was perfect. The cabin stood near the edge of a small town. Around it were tall trees, green fields, and a quiet dirt road. There were a few neighbors nearby, but none were very close. Ben liked the idea of living where he could hear the birds and the wind, not the noise of cars and people. When Ben first came to see the cabin, he felt something special. The old wooden door creaked as he opened it, and inside, the air smelled like pine and old books. The windows were dusty, but the sunlight came through in soft, warm beams. Ben looked around and imagined himself sitting by the small fireplace, reading a book or writing in his journal. The cabin needed work, but Ben did not mind. He wanted to fix it slowly, at his own pace. The floors were a little crooked, and some of the walls had cracks, but the roof was strong. Outside, the garden was wild and overgrown with grass and flowers. Ben thought he could make it beautiful again. His first night in the cabin was quiet and calm. The stars shone bright in the sky, and Ben could hear the soft sounds of the forest at night, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves. He felt safe here, like he was exactly where he belonged. The next morning, Ben woke up early and made himself a simple breakfast. He sat outside on the small porch, sipping his coffee, and watching the sun rise behind the trees. The fresh air filled his lungs, and for the first time in a long time, he felt relaxed. The cabin was his new beginning. Near the cabin were a few houses, part of a neighborhood with rules and a group called the Homeowners Association, or HOA. The HOA was meant to keep the neighborhood clean and safe, but Ben wasn't sure what to expect. So far, the neighbors had kept to themselves, and the HOA had only sent him a few letters about small things like trash bins and lawn care. Ben wanted to respect the rules but hoped the neighbors would also understand his simple life. He did not want to cause trouble or make anyone unhappy. For now, he just wanted to enjoy his quiet days, working on the cabin and taking long walks in the woods. One afternoon, while clearing some bushes near the cabin, Ben heard a car stop on the road. He looked up and saw a woman standing at the edge of her yard, watching him carefully. She was middle-aged, with sharp eyes and a tight smile. Ben smiled and waved. "Hello," he said politely. The woman didn't smile back. Instead, she crossed her arms and said, "I'm Mrs. Reed. I live across the street. You should know the HOA doesn't like people changing things without permission." Ben nodded slowly. "I'm just fixing the cabin a little. Nothing big." Mrs. Reed's eyes narrowed. "You better be careful. The HOA is watching." Ben felt a little uneasy but tried not to show it. "I understand. I'll be careful." Days passed, and Ben worked on the cabin. He fixed the broken window, painted the door, and cleaned the porch. He wanted to make the place look nice, but he also wanted to keep it simple and natural. Every evening, he sat outside, listening to the sounds of the forest and feeling the cool breeze. Sometimes, Ben saw Mrs. Reed talking to other neighbors. He could hear her voice, sharp and loud, complaining about small things. One day, she knocked on his door. "You need to cut the grass," she said without a smile. "It looks messy." Ben smiled politely. "I'm working on it. It will look better soon." Mrs. Reed shook her head. "The HOA has rules. You have to follow them." Ben nodded again, but inside, He felt a little sad. He did not want to make enemies. He just wanted peace. Despite this, Ben loved his cabin. It was a place where he could think and be himself. He remembered the long years in the city, always busy and stressed. Here, he could slow down and enjoy small things: a bird's song, the smell of fresh earth, the soft light of the sun through the trees. One evening, as the sun began to set, Ben sat on the porch and looked at the forest. The sky was painted in pink and orange, and the air smelled like pine and earth. He closed his eyes and felt calm. This was his home now. But deep inside, Ben knew that the quiet life he dreamed of might not last. The sharp eyes of Mrs. Reed and the rules of the HOA were always close, watching. And sometimes, even in the quietest places, trouble can find a way to come. The days passed quietly at first. Ben continued fixing his cabin slowly. He painted the porch, cleared the wild grass, and even planted some flowers near the door. The cabin began to look alive again, full of hope and warmth. Ben enjoyed the work; it gave him peace. He dreamed of sitting outside in the summer, drinking tea and watching the sun set. But something had changed. Mrs. Reed, the woman who lived across the street, started coming to Ben's cabin more often. At first, she only looked from her porch, frowning and shaking her head. But soon, she began knocking on Ben's door almost every week. One morning, just as Ben finished mowing the small lawn, Mrs. Reed appeared again. Her eyes were sharp and cold. "You need to clean the gutters," she said without any greeting. Ben was surprised. "The gutters? I was planning to do that next week." Mrs. Reed didn't smile. "The HOA says it should be done now. If you don't, they will send a fine." Ben sighed. "Okay, I'll do it soon." That afternoon, Ben climbed the old ladder and cleaned the gutters carefully. He thought, maybe this will stop the complaints. But it did not. Soon, Ben noticed small notes left on his porch. Some were polite reminders from the HOA about rules. Others were harsher, written in bold letters, telling him to fix the broken fence or remove the old wood pile. Ben tried to keep up, but the list grew longer every day. One afternoon, while Ben was painting the fence, he heard voices behind him. He turned and saw Mrs. Reed talking to two other neighbors. Their faces were serious. Ben walked closer and said politely, "Is there a problem?" Mrs. Reed looked at him with a cold smile. "We are just making sure the neighborhood stays nice." Ben nodded slowly. "I understand. I want that too." But he felt the tension in the air. It was not just about rules anymore. It was about something deeper. Mrs. Reed and the others seemed to watch him like a stranger, someone who did not belong. Ben remembered how quiet and welcoming the neighborhood had seemed when he first arrived. Now, the smiles were gone, replaced by suspicion and coldness. One evening, Ben sat on his porch, thinking about everything. He looked at the wildflowers he had planted, the fence he had painted, and the cabin he was fixing. He wondered if he was doing the right thing. Was this cabin really his home? Or was it just a place where he was not welcome? The next morning, a letter arrived. It was from the HOA. Ben opened it carefully. The letter said he had broken several rules: the grass was too long, the fence was not painted the right color, and the cabin's roof needed repair. It warned him that if he did not fix these problems soon, the HOA would take legal action. Ben felt a knot in his stomach. He had been working hard, but it was never enough. The rules seemed to change every day, and the neighbors were watching closely, waiting for him to make a mistake. He decided to visit the HOA office. Maybe talking to them face to face would help. He wanted to explain his situation and ask for more time to fix the cabin. At the small office, Ben met Mr. Clark, the HOA manager. Mr. Clark was a serious man, wearing glasses and a tight tie. He listened to Ben carefully. "I understand your concerns," Mr. Clark said. "But the rules are for everyone. We want the neighborhood to look nice and safe. If your cabin is not up to standards, we must act." Ben nodded. "I'm trying my best. I just need some time." Mr. Clark sighed. "I'll tell the board. But they are strict." Ben left the office feeling tired and worried. The cabin he loved was now a problem. He wondered if he could keep fighting. Back at his cabin, Ben found a note on his door. This one was from Mrs. Reed herself. "You should know, Ben, many neighbors are unhappy. This place is not the quiet cabin you think it is. We watch everything. Be careful." Ben's hands trembled as he read the note. It was not just a warning. It felt like a threat. Days went by, and Ben noticed changes in how people treated him. The neighbors no longer smiled or said hello. Children who once waved now crossed the street when he passed. Even the mailman was distant. Ben felt lonely. The cabin was supposed to be his safe place, but now it felt like a trap. One evening, after a long day working on the cabin, Ben sat on the porch and looked up at the stars. He whispered, "Why is this happening? I just want to live quietly." The wind moved through the trees, and Ben heard the distant sound of dogs barking. For the first time, the quiet woods felt strange and unwelcoming. Still, Ben did not give up. He knew he had to keep going. The cabin was more than wood and nails, it was his dream, his peace. But little did he know, the struggle was just beginning. Mrs. Reed and the HOA were watching, and soon, the small fight over a cabin would become much bigger. Ben had spent many days and nights working on his cabin. Despite the cold shoulders from the neighbors and the endless complaints from the HOA, he held on to hope. The cabin was his dream, his quiet place, and he was determined to make it better. One clear, cool evening, Ben decided to gather some firewood from the nearby forest. The air smelled fresh, and the sun was setting, painting the sky with colors of orange and pink. He wanted to have a small fire in his fireplace later that night, to warm himself and feel the comfort of home. As Ben walked through the woods, collecting dry branches and logs, he thought about the days ahead. He hoped to finish fixing the porch roof and plant more flowers. He dreamed of inviting a few friendly neighbors over someday, maybe Mrs. Allen or Mr. Davis, who had only smiled politely at him before. He wanted to believe things could change. After gathering enough wood, Ben headed back to his cabin. The last light of day was fading, and soon the stars would appear. He felt tired but happy to have collected what he needed. But as Ben turned the corner near his cabin, he saw something that made his heart stop. Smoke was rising from the woods near his property. The smell of burning wood filled the air, sharp and thick. Ben ran faster, his breath catching in his throat. The smoke grew darker and thicker as he got closer. When he reached the edge of his yard, the terrible sight became clear: his cabin was on fire. Flames were climbing up the old wooden walls, glowing bright red and orange against the darkening sky. The fire crackled loudly, and sparks flew like tiny stars into the air. The windows shattered, and thick black smoke poured out, making it hard to breathe. Ben dropped the firewood and ran toward the cabin, but the heat was too strong. He had no way to stop the fire. The small bucket of water he had was useless against the flames. Neighbors began to come out of their houses, drawn by the bright fire and the smell of smoke. Some called the fire department, while others stood watching, faces pale and worried. Ben's heart ached as he saw everything he had worked for burn to the ground. The cabin, the place where he had found peace, was disappearing in flames. He felt helpless, lost, and broken. When the fire trucks arrived, firefighters quickly worked to put out the fire. Water sprayed from the hoses, hissing as it touched the burning wood. After what felt like hours, the fire was finally out. But the damage was done. The cabin was destroyed. Only charred wood and ashes remained. Ben stood silently, his eyes fixed on the ruins. He could feel the weight of loss pressing down on him. As the firefighters packed up, Ben noticed a familiar figure approaching Mrs. Reed. She walked slowly toward him, her face unreadable. "I called the cops," she said quietly. Ben looked at her, confused and hurt. "Why? What for?" Mrs. Reed looked away, then back at him. "You don't take care of your property. The fire could have been worse. The HOA needs to know." Ben's hands clenched into fists. He wanted to explain, but the words caught in his throat. How could she say such things when his cabin was burning? How could she not see that he was the victim? Before he could reply, a police car arrived. Officers stepped out and began asking questions. Ben told them everything he knew. He said he had been gathering firewood and had no idea how the fire started. He said he had been careful with his fireplace and had no reason to cause harm. But Mrs. Reed's voice was loud and firm. She suggested that Ben might have been careless, or even that he could have started the fire on purpose. The police looked at Ben with doubt. Ben felt the cold sting of fear and unfairness. The person who burned his cabin was unknown, but the blame seemed to fall on him. Neighbors whispered behind their hands, and Ben heard some say he was reckless or trouble. The police took his statement but said they needed to investigate. For Ben, it was the start of a new nightmare. That night, Ben stayed in a small motel in town. He could not sleep. Images of the burning cabin, the angry looks, and Mrs. Reed's cold words haunted him. He thought about everything he had lost, not just the cabin, but his hope for peace, his sense of safety, and even the trust of the neighbors. Ben wondered how he would start again. Would he rebuild? Would the neighbors ever accept him? The next morning, news about the fire had spread through the small town. Some people offered kind words, but others whispered rumors. The HOA sent a letter saying they were reviewing the situation and reminded Ben of the rules he had broken. Ben felt crushed, but deep inside, a small voice told him not to give up. This was not the end of his story. He knew he would have to fight to clear his name and rebuild his life. But first, he needed to find the truth about the fire. Who had started it? Why? And would justice be possible in this quiet town? After the fire, Ben's life changed in ways he never imagined. The cabin he loved was gone, and now his name was caught in a storm he didn't understand. The police kept asking questions, but no answers came. Instead, the suspicion around Ben grew heavier. One morning, just as Ben was returning from the grocery store, 2 police officers stopped him near his small car. Their faces were serious, and Ben's heart sank. "Ben, we need you to come with us to the station for some more questions," one officer said quietly. Ben's mind raced. "What is this about?" "It's about the fire at your cabin," the officer replied. Ben nodded slowly and agreed. He hoped this would clear things up quickly, but deep inside, fear grew. At the police station, The officers took Ben to a small room with a cold metal table and 2 chairs. The walls were plain, and the room felt empty. Ben sat down, his hands trembling slightly. The officers asked him the same questions he had answered before. Where was he the night of the fire? Did he have anyone who could prove his story? Had he seen anyone near the cabin that day? Ben answered honestly. I was gathering firewood in the forest. I didn't see anyone suspicious. One officer looked at him closely. But there are reports from neighbors that say otherwise. Ben's throat tightened. I don't know what they saw. I was alone. After a long hour, the officers left the room to speak privately. When they returned, their faces were firm. We have to take you in for now, one said. You're under suspicion of causing the fire. Ben's heart dropped. But I didn't do anything. The officers gently placed handcuffs on him. Ben felt a cold wave of shock and sadness wash over him. How could this happen? How could he be treated like a criminal when he was the one who lost everything? At the police station, Ben sat in a holding cell. The walls were gray and cold, and the metal bench was hard beneath him. He tried to stay calm, but his thoughts were loud and confusing. He thought about the fire, the neighbors, Mrs. Reed's harsh words, and the rumors spreading through the town. It all felt like a nightmare. Later, Ben was brought before a judge for a bail hearing. The courtroom was small, filled with quiet voices and serious faces. Ben's lawyer stood beside him, ready to defend his case. The judge listened to the officer's report and the HOA's complaints. They said Ben was careless and ignored the rules, putting the neighborhood at risk. Ben's lawyer spoke calmly. My client has no history of trouble. He has always tried to follow the rules and has no reason to cause harm. We ask for understanding and time to investigate the true cause of the fire. The judge nodded but warned Ben to stay within the town and avoid any contact with the neighbors during the investigation. Ben was released on bail, but the heavy cloud of suspicion did not lift. Back home, or what was left of it, Ben faced the quiet that now felt cold and empty. The cabin was gone, and so was the hope for peace. The neighbors avoided him. Children crossed the street when he walked by. Mrs. Reed watched him from her porch, her eyes sharp and cold. Ben felt alone. The place he thought was a refuge had turned into a prison. But even in this darkness, Ben held on to one thing, the truth. He believed that the fire was not his fault. Someone had started it, and he would find out who. He started talking to people in town, quietly asking questions, looking for answers. Some people were kind and shared what they knew. Others stayed silent, afraid of getting involved. One evening, a neighbor named Mr. Harris came to Ben's door. Mr. Harris was an older man who lived 2 houses down. He had watched the fire from his porch. Ben, I saw something that night, Mr. Harris said softly. Ben's heart beat faster. What did you see? Mr. Harris hesitated, then continued. I saw a person near your cabin just before the fire started. It was dark, and I couldn't see clearly, but they didn't look like they lived here. Ben listened carefully. Did you recognize them? Mr. Harris shook his head. No, but I think they were hiding. Maybe someone wanted to hurt you. Ben thanked Mr. Harris and felt a small spark of hope. Someone else knew more than they had told the police. The next days were filled with more questions, more visits, and quiet conversations. Ben knew the road ahead was difficult, but he was not ready to give up. One night, as Ben sat alone in a small motel room, he looked at a photo of his cabin before the fire. It was not just a building, it was his dream, his hard work, and his peace. He whispered to himself, "I will find the truth. I will clear my name." The fight was just beginning. The day of the court hearing arrived, and Ben stood outside the small courthouse with a mix of fear and determination. The sun was bright, but inside him, he felt a storm. This was more than just a trial about a fire, it was a fight for his life, his reputation, and his future. Ben had never been in a courtroom before. The building looked old, with tall pillars and big wooden doors. He took a deep breath and walked inside. The air was heavy, filled with the sound of quiet voices and footsteps on the floor. His lawyer, Mr. Thompson, greeted him with a calm smile. "We'll get through this," he said kindly. Ben nodded, but his hands were still shaking. Inside the courtroom, the judge sat at the front, serious and quiet. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Miss Evans, stood ready. She looked at Ben like he was already guilty. Miss Evans spoke first. "Your Honor, the defendant, Ben, has caused a fire that destroyed his cabin and put the neighborhood at risk. We have witnesses who say he ignored warnings and rules. The fire could have been prevented if he had followed the HOA's instructions." Ben's heart sank. He wanted to speak, to explain, but he stayed silent, trusting his lawyer. Mr. Thompson stood up. "Your Honor, my client is innocent. He loved his cabin and took care of it as best he could. The fire was not caused by him. There is no proof that Ben was careless or dangerous. We believe someone else started the fire." The judge listened carefully as the lawyers presented their cases. Witnesses were called. Some neighbors spoke about the complaints and the letters. Mrs. Reed was there, her eyes cold as she described her concerns about Ben. Then Mr. Harris, the kind neighbor, stood and told what he had seen the night of the fire. "I saw someone near Ben's cabin before the fire started. It was dark, but the person didn't look like they lived in the neighborhood." Ben felt a small hope. Maybe the truth was coming out. The lawyers showed pictures of the fire's damage, and experts talked about how fires can start. The prosecutor said it looked like the fire began near the back of the cabin, where Ben was working on the garden. But the defense pointed out that Ben had been careful. He had never had any accidents before. They said the fire could have been started by someone else, maybe even on purpose. Ben's lawyer asked for security camera footage from nearby homes, hoping to find proof. But the prosecutor said the cameras did not show anything useful. As the trial went on, Ben felt tired but determined. He wanted the judge and the neighbors to see the real Ben, the man who loved the cabin and worked hard to fix it. Outside the courtroom during a break, Ben saw Mrs. Reed watching him again. Their eyes met, and Ben felt a cold chill. He wondered if she was behind all this, but he had no proof. Back inside, the final moments of the hearing came. The judge asked both sides to give their last words. Miss Evans spoke firmly. Ben's actions were careless. He ignored the HOA's rules, and now the neighborhood has suffered. Mr. Thompson stood and looked at the judge. Ben is a good man, unfairly blamed. We ask for justice and for him to be cleared of all charges. The judge nodded and said the court would decide soon. Ben left the courtroom feeling exhausted. He was not sure what the future held, but he knew one thing: he would not give up. That evening, Ben sat in a small cafe, thinking about everything. His mind was full of questions: who started the fire? Why? And how would he ever regain the trust of his neighbors? As he sipped his coffee, a gentle voice interrupted his thoughts. Ben. He looked up and saw Mrs. Allen, one of the neighbors who had been kind before. "I believe you," she said softly. "Don't lose hope." Ben smiled for the first time in days. "Thank you." Though the road was difficult, Ben realized he was not completely alone. Some people wanted to see the truth. He promised himself he would keep fighting not just for his cabin, but for his peace, his dreams, and a chance to start over. After the court hearing, life for Ben felt heavier than ever. Even though some neighbors showed kindness, many still whispered and looked away. The fire had changed everything, not just his cabin, but the way the whole town saw him. Ben knew he needed more than hope, he needed proof. One cool morning, as Ben walked through the small town square, he saw a familiar face, Mr. Harris, the older neighbor who had spoken at the trial. "Good morning, Ben," Mr. Harris said with a gentle smile. "Hello, Mr. Harris," Ben replied. "Thank you again for speaking in court." Mr. Harris nodded. "You deserve the truth to come out. I don't think you did this." They walked together, and Ben shared his worries. "The fire changed everything. I'm scared I might lose more than just my cabin." Mr. Harris placed a kind hand on Ben's shoulder. "Don't lose heart. Sometimes, the truth takes time." Ben looked at him, hope growing. Then, Mr. Harris said something surprising. "I have an old camera hidden near the woods. I thought it might catch some wildlife, but maybe it caught more." Ben's eyes widened. "Could we check it?" That afternoon, they went to the small clearing near the forest edge. Mr. Harris pulled out a dusty box and took out the camera. Ben held his breath as Mr. Harris turned it on. The screen showed pictures, birds, squirrels, and trees swaying in the wind. Then, suddenly, a shadow appeared. A figure moving quietly near where Ben's cabin had stood. Ben's heart pounded. "Who is that?" he whispered. Mr. Harris zoomed in. The figure wore a dark jacket and moved quickly, carrying something in their hand. Ben stared. "That's near my cabin. Could this be the person from the night of the fire?" Mr. Harris nodded slowly. "It's possible." Ben felt a new strength rising inside him. Here was a clue, a chance to find the real truth. Together, they took the footage to Ben's lawyer, Mr. Thompson. "This could be important," Mr. Thompson said, studying the images carefully. "If we can identify this person, it could change everything." The next few days were filled with work. Mr. Thompson contacted the police with the footage and asked for an investigation. Ben waited nervously. He hoped the law would find the person responsible. One afternoon, a detective called Ben. "We've been reviewing the footage. We believe the figure is someone from the neighborhood." Ben's heart raced. "Who?" The detective replied, "We're still investigating, but it seems suspiciously close to Mrs. Reed's property." Ben's mind reeled. Could it be true? Had Mrs. Reed, the strict neighbor who had watched him with cold eyes, been involved? He felt a mix of fear and relief. Fear because of what it meant, relief because finally, someone was looking at the real facts. Ben met with Mr. Thompson again. "We should prepare for the next court hearing," the lawyer advised. "This evidence is strong, but it needs to be presented clearly." Ben nodded. "I want everyone to know the truth." Meanwhile, news about the footage spread quietly among the neighbors. Some began to look at Ben differently, with curiosity instead of suspicion. Mrs. Allen, the kind neighbor from the cafe, stopped Ben on the street. "I heard about the camera," she said softly. "I hope this brings you justice." Ben smiled. "Thank you. It means a lot." The days moved faster as Ben waited for the next court date. He spent time rebuilding his life slowly. Though the cabin was gone, he still dreamed of a home, a place where he could feel safe. One evening, as Ben sat in the small community library, he thought about everything he had lost and everything he had gained. He had faced suspicion, loneliness, and pain. But he also found kindness, courage, and hope. The fight was not over, but Ben was no longer alone. He was ready to face whatever came next, with truth as his shield and hope as his guide. The day of the final court hearing arrived with a quiet tension hanging in the air. Ben stood outside the courthouse once again, but this time he felt a little stronger. The camera footage had given him hope. Now, the truth was ready to come out. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was serious. The judge took his seat, and the lawyers prepared their notes. Ben's lawyer, Mr. Thompson, gave him a reassuring nod. Ben took a deep breath and waited. The prosecutor, Miss Evans, opened the session. Your Honor, new evidence has been presented. Security footage shows a person near the defendant's property at the time of the fire. This evidence requires careful review. Mr. Thompson stood. Your Honor, we believe this footage shows the real person responsible for the fire. My client, Ben, is innocent. We ask that he be cleared of all charges. The judge listened quietly as the footage was played on a large screen. The image showed a dark figure moving near Ben's cabin just before the fire started. The courtroom fell silent. Then, the prosecutor called a surprise witness, a man named Tom, who worked for the HOA. Tom explained that the person in the footage was someone who had been upset about the new cabins being built nearby. Tom described how Mrs. Reed had been especially unhappy with Ben's cabin, even before the fire. She had spoken loudly at meetings and sent many complaints. Miss Evans, now looking uneasy, said, "We have reason to believe that the fire may have been started by someone acting out of anger." Ben's heart pounded. Could it be true that Mrs. Reed had caused all this trouble? The judge asked for Mrs. Reed to come forward. She was called to testify. Mrs. Reed sat stiffly, avoiding Ben's eyes. The lawyer asked, "Mrs. Reed, were you near the defendant's cabin on the night of the fire?" Mrs. Reed hesitated, then said quietly, "Yes, I was. But I didn't start the fire." Her voice trembled. The lawyer continued, "Can you explain why you were there?" Mrs. Reed looked down. "I wanted to see if Ben was following the HOA rules. I was angry that he didn't listen. But I swear, I did not start the fire." The judge took notes and then addressed the courtroom. Based on the evidence and testimony, the court finds that there is not enough proof to charge the defendant, Ben, with causing the fire. The investigation will continue to find the true cause. A wave of relief washed over Ben. The whispers and suspicion that had weighed on him for so long finally began to fade. Outside the courtroom, Ben felt a lightness he hadn't known in months. His friends from the town came to shake his hand and offer smiles. Mrs. Allen gave him a warm hug. Ben looked at the crowd and realized that things were starting to change. The fire had taken his cabin, but it had also opened the door to new beginnings. Over the next weeks, Ben worked with some neighbors to clean up the land where his cabin had stood. The community slowly came together to help rebuild not just the place, but the trust that had been lost. Ben even began planning a new cabin, one that would be stronger and safer. But more importantly, it would be a symbol of hope and friendship. One sunny afternoon, as Ben planted a small tree near the clearing, Mr. Harris joined him. "You're doing well, Ben," he said kindly. Ben smiled. Thanks to you and the others. I never thought I'd feel part of this town. Mr. Harris nodded. Sometimes, when things seem hardest, that's when the strongest roots grow. Ben looked at the young tree, its small leaves shining in the sunlight. It reminded him of his own journey, fragile at first, but growing stronger every day. Life was not perfect, and the memories of the fire and the fight would stay with him. But Ben knew he had found something important: courage, truth, and a place to call home. As the sun set behind the hills, Ben stood quietly, feeling peace in his heart for the first time in a long while. He whispered softly to himself, "This is just the beginning." And with that, Ben stepped forward into his new life, ready for whatever the future held.